Zay in the house. Let's jump into the nerdverse. I went to see Avatar 3, Fire and Ashes, already knowing this wouldn't be an easy movie to analyze, because Avatar has never really been a franchise built on strong scripts or memorable dialogue, and I left the theater with a very clear and very honest feeling. This is a massive cinematic experience. Visually overwhelming, technically flawless, but narratively fragile, and everything I'm about to say here is a personal analysis, based entirely on my own experience watching the film from start to finish on the biggest screen possible, with the volume cranked up the way Avatar was meant to be seen. If you're expecting a deep story full of clever twists and powerful dialogue, Avatar 3 doesn't really deliver that, because the script is simple, predictable in many moments, and the dialogue rarely goes beyond what's functional, existing mainly to move the plot from one spectacular set piece to the next. But if what you're looking for is visual impact, scale, immersion, and that feeling that only cinema can provide, then Fire and Ashes is still extremely effective. And right at the start, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share this with anyone who loves movies, sci-fi, and nerd culture. And leave a comment down below telling me whether you've already seen Avatar 3 or if you're still hyped for it, because that support helps the channel grow a lot and really motivates me to keep bringing this kind of in-depth analysis to you. Avatar 3 is, without exaggeration, the most decisive film in the entire franchise so far. Not only within the story, but especially outside of it, because this third chapter works as a real survival test for Avatar as a franchise. Since James Cameron himself has made it clear that Avatar 4 and Avatar 5 will only happen if this movie is a massive success, which puts enormous pressure on the project and helps explain why everything here feels bigger, louder, more intense, and more exaggerated. Unlike the previous films, Fire and Ashes moves away from that almost idealized vision of Pandora as a pristine spiritual paradise and instead presents a planet that is far more aggressive, fragmented, and internally conflicted, where not every Na'vi is good, not every culture is guided by balance and harmony, and not every problem can be solved through spiritual connection and empathy. And this shift in tone is one of the most interesting choices in the movie, even if the script doesn't fully commit to exploring all of its consequences. After the loss of their eldest son, the Sully family returns to the center of the narrative carrying an emotional weight that should be devastating, but which the film handles in a fairly superficial way through dialogue, because the grief is there, the pain exists, but it's communicated much more through imagery than through words, appearing in looks, framing, and the physical distance or closeness between characters, once again reinforcing the idea that Avatar communicates far better through visuals than through text. This trauma acts as the emotional engine of the story, but it's rarely explored through truly impactful conversations, which weakens the dramatic weight even though the intention is clear. It's within this context that the film introduces its new major threat, the Fire Tribe, known as the Ash People, led by a visually striking group defined by volcanic environments, constant smoke, bodies covered in ash, and an aggressive use of fire as both a weapon and a cultural symbol, completely breaking away from the aquatic, organic, and almost sacred iconography the franchise has built so far. Visually, this tribe is a spectacle on its own, because every scene involving fire, explosions, and destruction is designed to impress, but narratively they are underdeveloped, since, aside from the members of the Ash People have no names, no personalities, and no real character arcs, functioning more as a threatening force than as actual characters. Even Varang herself, despite a strong presence, striking design, and commanding performance, ends up being a shallow villain, defined by a few basic traits like ambition, vanity, and tyranny, working more as a symbol of danger than as a truly complex antagonist, which weakens the central conflict. At the same time, the now Na'vi Colonel Quaritch remains one of the most interesting elements in the film precisely because of his ambiguity, since he doesn't go through a clear redemption arc, but he's also no longer just a one-dimensional villain, instead becoming someone who shares temporary interests with the protagonists, creating uncomfortable strategic alliances that make sense from a military perspective, but not from an emotional one. And that generates some of the film's most compelling tension, even if, once again, the dialogue doesn't fully explore the potential of that dynamic. From a technical standpoint, Avatar 3 is simply insane. and there's not much to argue here. James Cameron remains an absolute master of spectacle cinema, because Pandora continues to be one of the richest, most detailed, and most convincing worlds ever created for film. With a constant feeling that you're really there, breathing that air, feeling the heat of the fire, the moisture of the water, and the weight of destruction, the texture of the environments, the fauna, the flora, the creatures, everything feels tangible and real. And in many moments, it's nearly impossible to tell where practical effects end and CGI begins, which is an incredible technical achievement. There is admittedly a slight sense of uncanny realism when it comes to the Navy themselves, precisely because they are so sharp and detailed that they sometimes resemble video game cuts. But this isn't a technical flaw, it's an aesthetic choice, and over time your eyes adjust. The use of variable frame rate, switching between 24 FPS in commerce scenes and 48 FPS during action sequences, makes everything feel smoother, cleaner, and free of motion blur, something that can feel strange at first for some viewers, but quickly becomes part of the experience, enhancing immersion. The 3D, unlike in most modern films, is used intelligently, always in service of depth and presence, reinforcing the idea that Avatar isn't just a movie, but a cinematic event. The result is a film that works almost like a theme park attraction in the best possible sense, where you're not just watching, but constantly being stimulated by sound, color, scale, and movement, which makes the long runtime feel far less exhausting than it otherwise might. The problem is that once the visual impact starts to repeat itself, the weaknesses of the script become more apparent, because the story stretches beyond what it really needs. Situations repeat, conflicts spin in circles, and certain decisions seem to exist solely to keep the spectacle at a maximum level, reinforcing the feeling that Avatar, as a narrative, has already said almost everything it had to say, and now relies almost entirely on its packaging to stay relevant. The climax follows this exact bigger and bigger logic, with simultaneous battles on land, in the air, and in the water. Massive machines, colossal creatures, and improbable alliances, all visually stunning, but also filled with convenient solution, last-minute rescues, and questionable character decisions. Even so, it's impossible to deny that Avatar 3 is the most spectacular entry in the franchise so far. And the best way to summarize the experience is to think of it as a beautifully wrapped gift, with packaging so impressive that you spend a long time admiring it before opening it, only to realize that the content inside isn't exactly new. It's something you've received before, just in a different wrapping, and yet the beauty of the form still manages, at least partially, to overcome the frustration with the repeated content. In the end, I enjoyed the movie, not so much for what it says, but for how it shows it. Because James Cameron remains a master at creating unique visual experiences, and as long as he can deliver spectacle at this level, Avatar will continue to find an audience, even if the big question of how long that will be, enough remains unanswered. And now, I want to hear from you. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you agree that the script is weak, but the visuals carry everything. Share this video with your friends who love movies and science fiction. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because that support makes all the difference in keeping this kind of content coming. And follow the channel so you don't miss the next videos, because there's still a lot left to explore in the nerd.